Now, we worked for a for-profit business. This wasn't a nonprofit business.
That's right.
So it's very important that we count the beans, that we were able to really measure what we were doing from a financial impact, right? And when we first met, one of the things as we kind of made our agreement on how we were going to interact with each other, me consulting on my time and services, I was very hesitant on really figuring out like how would we do this and measure it? Like, what were the KPIs? And as you answered this, it was more of an observational thing. At that point in the discussion, where you voiced to me that we would look around this room that we were in and we would see that the consumer would change.
Right.
We would also feel that it would change. But at that point, we didn't know how to measure that change.
Right.
So you were very essential. Like this is something that I credit you with, because I didn't understand the hotel business. I understand business like from a general perspective, but you know the nuances of it. You know how it operates from the top. So like, please walk us through how do we accomplish? How do we count the beans?
Yeah, and I remember that moment. I will never forget the moment that we were sitting in Topside having that conversation, and you asked about KPIs. My first thought was like, good on you saying business terms and things in the conversation, but saying we'll measure it by looking around the room and seeing that the best of Baltimore is represented in the space requires, number one, an understanding of what the best of Baltimore is. And I think if we have a very narrow lens on what has value, then we stand a chance of like missing the forest for the trees kind of thing. I think counting the beans to me in this respect is that idea, capturing and quantifying value. And the obvious thought is, well, what is the financial impact of the work? I think you cannot solely focus on the financial impact, because if you're building a body of work over time that leads to increased financial impact down the road, well, if you're starving for GOP, or gross operating profit, every time you do a thing, then you stand a chance of abandoning a good idea that just needed time to mature. And I think because this is pioneer work that we're doing in many cases, we don't have a baseline to compare to say, well, it typically takes 6 months of impact embedded in your ecosystem to lead to a 10% increase in profit. So because you don't have a roadmap, because you don't have a baseline, it is a bit of a leap of faith. But part of why we felt it was so important to push out this text and this manual, this handbook, if you will, was so that people could point to something and say, this has worked, it's been documented, it's been tracked. So to go back to the origin of this idea, we just felt like if we look at everything we do and we figure out who's the audience, and how is this meaningful and valuable to the audience, and let's track that. Now, if we don't have an audience, then we don't have an idea, and we shouldn't do a thing. Once we've identified who the audience is, if we cannot identify why the thing is meaningful to them, then again, we don't have an idea and we shouldn't do a thing. But during the pandemic, when demand went to zero, and we've never seen demand go to zero before, well, you still have the asset. So how do you add value to the brand? How do you add value to the audience? How do you add value to the community? Well, for us, it was, well, let's look at our entire supply chain and who else is impacted. The first thought we had was, well, what's going to happen with all the food all the produce that's been plucked, but not been used? And so we're like, well, rather than let that just kind of die in a warehouse somewhere, send it to us, we'll do something with it. And so I use this example because there was no direct financial value to the business to feeding 1,600 people every week in Baltimore during the pandemic. But we know that created relationships, bonds, awareness, media, that subsequently added value to the brand. So when the whole world was still shut down, people were emailing us. And I think from a place of, we want to give you encouragement to keep going, keep doing what you're doing, but also to make the declaration this is now my hotel of choice.
Mm-hmm.
So we don't know when the world's going to open back up, but whenever it does, and I'm in that city, I'm staying with you. And so I think it created internal pent-up demand that we couldn't quantify until after the pandemic.
Yeah.
So if we abandon one of those ideas because nobody bought a room, then we don't see the impact that comes 2 years later, when now you're, instead of indexing below your fair share, you're indexing, at 1.5 times your fair share just a couple years later.
I think where the readers can really benefit from this is understanding that this was a reaction, right, to a situation that nobody was prepared for.
That's right.
And we were doing what we felt was the right thing.
That's right.
Not intending to see that level of an impact on the market, but ultimately we learned from it. And this is one of those opportunities where the second mouse gets the cheese.
That's right.
Right. So as a reader of this, a viewer of this, everybody has an opportunity to learn how to just get the reward out of our experience ultimately, and be proactive, start to plan towards this and build that into how they design the way that their business works.
Yeah, and we've said a number of times, this text, this content, now this video isn't meant to be comprehensive. This is not the end all be all of this set of ideas or even this philosophy. This is open source. This is meant to be everybody engage with it, everybody add a little to it, and let's all learn from each other. We do not have all the answers. Certainly, most of our ideas have been successful, but we have made mistakes along the way. It's meant to be iterative, and I think it's meant to be collective. In nature, the spirit of this work is collective.
And I want to impress on everyone that's consuming this content that you can't measure the wrong thing, right? Culture you can't measure, right? So you have to figure out the things that you can actually observe and put some data to. So we've been able to do that in a few ways that are outlined in the chapters, ways that you can find online. But ultimately, we've been able to make business decisions from.
Yeah, I think you're talking about two people who love a good spreadsheet, who love a good presentation deck, but who also recognize that there's value embedded in the work that leads to those outcomes, that lead to the things that can be sell A5 on the spreadsheet, but have to happen first. And so this is meant to inspire the imagination of creative and dynamic leaders in whatever industries, to be fearless in how they approach that work, because it is sort of inherently innovative, and I think every innovator will run up against the inertia of the environment, and they have to be courageous enough and strong enough to push through.
Awesome.